Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets of Extreme Metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka Yngve Malmsteen, but when he was fat and funny, not when he was skinny and mean.
And I am the black metal guy, aka we technically never called for the death of Mick Jagger. That was that aka recommended by our legal team.
Exactly. First off, before we do anything else, rest in power, Dusty Rhodes of ZZ Top. ZZ Top, actually one of the first ever bands I saw in concert when I was a kid. Obviously, outstanding performers, and I couldn't believe when I was doing some reading on it that Dusty had played with that band for over half a century. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone else that really competes.
Well, maybe like the drummer of AC/DC who got busted for selling meth or something.
But the problem is that broke his streak. You know, if he's in jail for selling meth, he can't drum for AC/DC anymore.
That is the problem.
Plus, actually, AC/DC cycled through several drummers, I think.
Yeah, he was with them. He was with them for a really long time. I can't remember. This was some shocking story in the news for like 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, it's like we always say, AC/DC is somehow one of the more underrated rock bands, as approved by metal guys. Oh, absolutely. ZZ Top is basically essential Americana at this point.
George Thorogood and the Destroyers.
Oh, 100%. All that shit. But ZZ Top still feels vibrant and fresh. Mm-hmm. You know, even their oldest material from the 70s, it sounds beautiful. So, Terminus news. And this is actually a pretty important one, so guys, pay attention. Mm-hmm. All right, so, if you're listening to this, you might not have seen that alongside this episode, we have also released an interview that I did with none other than Laurie Bravo, the bassist and vocalist of the legendary band Nuclear Death. I have been a huge Nuclear Death fan, like, ever since I was a kid. They've been a huge influence on me musically and critically. And I got the opportunity to speak with Laurie for a few hours about the history of the band. And we've talked a fair amount since then, and I consider her a friend now. But the big announcement that I want to make is, you know, after doing the interview, me and Laurie sat and chatted for a while longer. And I was asking her, you know, Laurie, so why isn't any of the old Nuclear Death material, you know, the back catalog, available digitally? Because it's never been available online outside of, you know, YouTube uploads, things like that. And, you know, we got to talking, and we basically reached an agreement. So I'm very proud to announce that for the first time in history, the entire Nuclear Death back catalog is now available digitally for the future. You can go to nucleardeath.bandcamp.com, where you can find all the full lengths as well as the original 4 demos from the late 80s as bonus tracks on the first couple records. I want to thank Laurie for allowing me the opportunity to help her out with this. It's been a real privilege to be able to kind of archive this stuff for the future. And everything on there, for those who are interested, is pay what you want. So throw Laurie some money. It should go without saying, but I'll make it clear. We receive absolutely no money from this.
Wait,
you know,
dude, that's huge. I had no idea it was all paid for. I totally forgot that.
Oh, yeah, we just did pay what you want on it. And, so definitely check that out. Check out the interview with Laurie. Anyone who's into really extreme, kind of cutting-edge, old-school death metal from back in the day should absolutely be going there and checking those records out, as well as checking out Laurie's new music just under her own name. Really fascinating kind of neo-blues singer-songwriter stuff that is also very remarkable. So yeah, I'm just really excited to announce this. This is kind of exciting. You know, I think it's important that this stuff get preserved for the future, and I'm really happy that, you know, we got to be a part of that.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I've told you before, but it's very cool that you put yourself out there to do that. And I guess this archival stuff and related things, I guess we might explore moving more into areas like that. right?
Yeah, after doing this, I got very excited, and now I'm thinking, what other stuff is out there that I've loved for so many years, but has been a little bit lost to time or only occasionally re-released in limited quantities. We got to find a way to back all this stuff up for future generations. So I think that's going to be something that we want to explore some more going forward.
Yo, do you have like a short, grindy nuclear death track that we can play? Because, for instance, the black metal guy, I'm vaguely familiar with nuclear death. I know the idea. I've probably listened to it in the Blogspot days, but if I don't know it, a bunch of people who are potentially interested in nuclear death don't know it.
Yeah, sure, we can do that. Here, I will just give you. Let's just listen to the classic, the first track off of Nuclear Death's Bride of Insect, which is called Necrobestiality, and I'll give you a link in the document.
Right.
I'll remove the time.
The document being the thing that we write our notes in.
Yes.
We're both logged into. We're both logged into the Google Doc while we're talking, and when it does, it feels like we're holding hands.
A grimoire of all of our notes.
Yes, yeah.
All right, so let's just listen to the first track. It's only a couple minutes long. Yeah. All right. And now that you hear that, everything about me makes so much more sense.
Wow, well, that was already the composite picture I had assembled in my head.
And you got to remember, this was recorded in late '89, so it's way ahead of its time.
Way ahead of its time, and also cool vestigial things, like her vocal rhythms are like John Brennan.
Oh yeah, and I love the.
And she keeps being like, "You're not ready to accept the negative approach."
And she'll do the kind of like lilting, almost like trad metal vibrato stuff. That'll pop up here and there. It's a very very singular band that, especially nowadays, with so many bands looking back towards kind of primordial extreme metal, more people should be paying attention to this, because there's so many ideas that are very fully realized back then, but not enough people have heard it.
For sure.
All right, so before we go into our roundup, real quick, the usual housekeeping, social media. Follow me, the Death Metal Guy, on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, or the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal. Additionally, if you really want to support the endeavors we undertake here on Terminus, you can feel free to subscribe to us on either Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gets you access to all the Terminus Prime bonus episodes, one of the latest of which has actually been made public, so you can check out what you'll be getting for your money. And $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server where we discuss the finer points of enemy tuning in JRPGs, as well as our favorite horrorcore tracks of years past.
Wow, much has changed on the Discord.
Oh yeah, no, me and Nick from Hessian Firm were talking about hip hop for a while you were typing up your notes. Yeah,
cool.
So we've got a really interesting show. We've got a lot of different kind of crisscrossing threads between the albums we're covering today, and we're doing the sandwich. So, what's your first slice of bread, buddy?
Mine is a big old slice of Broder. Which sounds like bread, but it actually means brother. The record is højes smed, which is which means the highest smith, which I will remind you in a second when we do this review. And it is it's by two brothers, Erik and Jesper Bagerfyd, who are central to the Korpsand scene in Denmark. It is extremely fast, aggressive black metal that has a lot in common with, as you would say, old, very primordial death metal, and is obviously about smashing stuff with hammers.
All right. So after that, on a very different note, we're going to go to the new record by Luminous Veil, titled Vespers for the Loom and Lain. This is a two-man project split between Wisconsin and Maryland, who I was unfamiliar with until I ran across this record. And I guess this is very challenging to describe, but I guess the elevator pitch for this is symphonic post-black metal. With all sorts of... Yeah, I know. I was terrified too, but then I listened to it, and it's got some actually very interesting ideas, and I think I'm actually really excited to talk about that one. And then after our interlude, we are going to be talking about Serpentrance with Akra Tapeinosis, maybe? Out now on Gods of War Productions. This is a very, let's say, severe Doom-influenced Black Death record, which is going to pair very nicely with the final record for tonight.
Which is Thaumaturgy, with Charnel Gnosis in the long EP category. This is coming out shortly on Adirondack Black Mass with a hard copy edition, but it's also up on YouTube. Is there a Thaumaturgy Bandcamp yet?
Probably.
I should know that. I was emailing with him, but this is a fan submission, and
yes, he does have a Bandcamp. Yes.
Okay, cool. It's a fan submission, and he listens to the show, so that's cool. And it is black death metal, kind of in a very similar manner to Serpentrance, but different mode of slow.
Yeah, it's interesting how much they share in common, and yet how unequivocally different they sound.
Mm-hmm. All right, and we are ready to go with Broder's højes smed, by out independently on Bandcamp right now, but with also then there's a record available too, and this is by the brothers Erik and Jesper Bagerfyd, who are both pretty involved with bands in the Danish Korpsand Circle, who we've covered a bit of and talked about a lot. The last one we did was the
Gabastock.
Sort of, Gabastock, the garage rockin' one. And they're kind of sonically a bit of an outlier, right? This is much closer to the core of the sound. The Korpsand stuff, sort of stompy heathen Danish black metal that is spiritually akin to the Legion Blotan stuff in the UK, or the descended via a number of leapfrogs from the sort of Klaxon Records or Youth Attack scene in the US.
Well, would there be any relation to like Fawnbearer?
Fawnbearer is a Korpsand band, my friend.
Oh, okay, I didn't know.
Yeah. No, Fawnbearer. We talk about them on the show, but we haven't covered them yet, right? Fawnbearer, good band. And other than that, people who follow that scene might know Jesper does Erikar, and Eric does Jordslet. I think Eric's a member in Jordslet. They're both in a band called Blot and Bod, which is a little bit more hi-fi, like just more, less sort of like raw punk black metal combo, and a little more hi-fi. But the songs are still very, very stripped down and power chord oriented, maybe even more so than some of the other bands. And also, Jesper has done some recording and producing on this scene, and has a sick techno project called Tårne Spirer. Okay. I don't know, probably means something about something spires, I would hope. So this record, right? So yeah, band name obviously means brother. Album title translates as The Highest Smith. You know who that is, right? And the it's got a just big old Thor's hammer on the cover, crushing a skull. But this is like really. I was like, God, we got to have some. It used to be like I was just constantly bringing pagan black metal on here, right? Mm-hmm. And now like the last couple of weeks, it's just been all sort of like a murky, cavernous Black Death, and various other things. So I was like, okay, time to get back on that. And I was looking around, and as soon as I found this, I was like, hell yeah! Like 12 seconds in to the first thing I clicked on, I was like, hell yeah! There's a good chance this is year-end material for me. Mm-hmm. Just like in terms of its just purity and vigor and rabid attack. It does a lot of things that I always love in black metal, and that is, we always say is too scarce nowadays. One is this go for the throat aggression, a raw sound that is powerful, big guitar sound, but extremely extremely in the red and fuzzy. It's like in some sense they're called a bulldozer guitar tone. As like the bulldozer bass, right, from Venom and all those bands. What it does at the sort of songwriting or composition level is like, this is how to make black metal that sounds pagan without using sort of a lot of the typical signals for that, right? Troped folk melodies or whatever. That can be great. I love a lot of stuff like that. Or the other thing that's become big now and has sort of converged with the troped folk melody would be those riffs. We all know which, right? The sliding Seigneur Voland and for the Franco-Finnish budget epic riff. So how do you do it without using either of these things? And putting it as distant as possible from the tendency towards pop that both those tendencies in pagan black metal sometimes have, right? Mm-hmm. It's a cool way of, it doesn't sound satanic, it doesn't sound sort of like, it doesn't really, it doesn't have a punk atmosphere per se. It sounds like extreme metal, as you said in the notes. But it is very punk. As far as other comparisons, so like the guitar tone and the stompy stuff has a lot to do with the Legion Blotan. But different emphasis, less stomp, more speed here. Different production, right? There's less. This is the Legion Blotan stuff is almost all kind of eccentric in different ways. This is just very down the line in a way that I really appreciate. And as far as things that I would compare to, this is kind of immediately around contemporary bands. It's pretty distinctive. But there's stuff that's spiritually akin, namely a band who are like one of my favorite nowadays bands who I always forget to mention on the show, but I've been listening to them a lot. Finland's Hate Spirit, all one word. and also your old favorites, Eisensker, just a band that was a bit, just a bit not death metal guy's flavor, but a band I quite liked, and they're from England, and what both of them do is sort of full band, raw full band playing, pagan black metal, influence coming directly from punk, like Discharge and stuff, and like how those things actually sounded, and driving and furious, but still without a lot of the classic cues for pagan or epic or melodic, but still with some color and nobility to it.
Yeah.
So, what do you make of it?
I had a lot of fun with this. Not as much as you, just because this is literally engineered by God for you.
Hey, by Thor, buddy.
But I did end up liking this. So what to compare it to? Well, I mean, I can hear the relation to something like Gabastok, even though that's obviously coming from a very different angle, but they're kind of revolving around similar ideas. A big one being sort of primordial extreme metal and punk fused together. I'm still hearing a lot of the touches of sort of like bestial burst stuff that I referenced regarding Gabastok. I was talking a little bit about stuff like Flooded Church of Asmodeus. And this is a lot closer to the main line of extreme metal than that, but it's still got its odd quality. And I was thinking for a while, what makes this so kind of different? What makes this so unusual to my ear? And I think that's because it's a very interesting kind of definitional question, because this is in a sense a black metal record, but what I hear is reaching back towards very kind of primitive, ugly deathrash stuff.
For sure.
Yeah, like this definitely goes towards like Master and Deathstrike territory for me.
Yeah. God, we need to just do something on Master and Deathstrike, don't we?
Yeah, we really should, yeah. But I think that where that comes from is it's almost like a structural thing to this music. Because one thing that surprised me is how kind of like this is mosh music. All the way.
Oh yeah, it was tested.
Yeah, there's huge knuckle-dragging mosh riffs across this whole record, which is very surprising when they're doing this, like, almost kind of war metal blasting stuff, with those kind of, like, barbarian heroic melodies that you're really into, and I can appreciate also. Sure. So I think the things that excited me most were the things that were sort of pulling on the threads of hardcore that were tucked away in early extreme metal, and bringing them out, fleshing them out, and kind of reincorporating them. So I thought it was a really interesting listen, and I would like to hear it expanded on a little more, just because this is a record with like 3 or 4 ideas, and that's what it is. I think that there might be more to expand on to make it a little bit more varied, but given the short running time and everything, I can't complain. It was a fun experience all the way through.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'd say this is it's an EP, but it's a substantial EP. They've got some banger tracks with some really good sort of nasty, sort of Old Norse sounding samples that really sound like the grit and the mud under the fingers and on the boots, and blood slopping everywhere, and metal scraping on things. It's very sounds
like it's pulled from VHS tapes of like Viking movies from the 80s.
Yeah, it's cool. It's very corporeal. Probably a bit of the spirit. We always say that Bonal is overrated, which is true. Just on a riff on like the riff level. However, we both really like the Bonal vibe and the lyrics, right? And so something about that completely, I mean, black metal's already kind of unromanticized view of these things, but like really unromanticized, sort of a nakedly physical and tangible view of this sort of this sort of ancient world, right? This band has a lot of that. Yeah, so let's go to a track that'll knock you on your ass. I guess Steal It. I don't know. I'm guessing maybe that means steal or something, but I haven't looked it up yet. Anyway, starts from the beginning. Let's roll. Dude, that the staggered chug on the stompy part. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's lethal.
Well, you also love this because the main like blast riff is like their play on the Devil Lock riff.
I was gonna say yes.
Yes. You've taught me well, sir.
Yes, good. You're learning. Yes, it's the Devil Lock riff for sure. So that's one way to make your extremely raw, punky black metal sound epic. Is you use the crushing sort of Dorian scale. We listen to heavy metal, but we're not trying to sound like it thing of later Misfits, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's for sure a lot of that. Just like hit those big, dark, power chord intervals. But still cool dissonant turns thrown in there. Really, I mean, the thing that's, in terms of sort of like, also the other part that sounded very Misfits, it just once it steps into once it goes into the 1-2 beat, it's pretty, just a lot of the rhythmic, a lot of the basic patterns here are a lot like that for sure. Like maybe more than I thought on first listen. Like when I was listening back to it, we were thinking basically the same thing. But from towards the end, right, they start to tear out these like trem octaves, right? Mm-hmm. And those sort of screaming octaves that add some melodic color and that have that kind of sawing on an ancient string instrument vibe that we love. And the band that those and things like that do sort of show up in Hate Forest, but the band that really is known for that stuff is Bolzer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and I mean, you like the later Bolzer stuff. I kind of thought they jumped the shark very quickly. But I still swear by that first EP, and they really captured something about eerie, high tension, sort of frenzied sounding barbarian music.
Yeah.
Tranced by the Wolf's Hook, man, the riff of a decade.
Bolts are the most important band in metal for 6 months.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and like, yeah, I hate to be that guy, but I still only like the first, only like Entrance by Bolts. So
I still think if you went back to Hero, you'd find more to enjoy at this point.
Hero! I do that. You
just gotta fucking believe in it. You just gotta believe in it, dude.
But anyway, point being, so what's cool is that is now coming. The only other band I can think of recently that does shit like that is doesn't sound like this, have this sort of pagan barbarian tone at all. It's that one. I'm gonna forget the name. There's a really, really nasty Black Death band that does it, but this is here, right? It's being pulled out of Bolzer, which is pretty technical, right? That guy uses a guitar with a lot of strings on it.
It's a very strange guitar. It's like a 10-string guitar with like a five regular strings and 5 octets, which is I was always surprised after Bolzer blew up that more people didn't try that, but yeah.
And so that's sort of, and it's fancy in the way that the sort of arrogant thrash kind of war metal stuff is, right? It's pretty technical. This is very raw, go for the throat music, but good news, you can still use pagan reptile brain drone octaves. And they even do it on these sort of varied, they've got nicely varied turnarounds on that basic riff, and when they go back to it at the end, you heard it, the sample ended it right there. They do it too fast. They do it really fast, so it just whiplashes around. But that's some of the octaves again too, and I really like that use of that incorporation of that technique into stuff that's on the more sort of bare bones end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Actually, listening to this again, what this is reminding me, I don't know how this didn't occur to me when I first listened to it. The closest thing this is onto the show, at least from kind of a structural or conceptual perspective, would be that Insurtus record we covered a while back.
Oh, I kind of get what you mean. Like, it sounds very new sounding stuff built with entirely sort of eccentric old school ingredients.
Yeah, the idea of this sort of like fever dream revisiting of primordial extreme metal. Because, like, listening to this again, it's like there's a lot of parts of this that can be built from Deathstrike and Bathory parts, you know? But now it's so blown out and over the top, it has a different character.
Or creator parts, honestly, too, you know?
Oh, yeah, like, definitely.
Yeah.
Any sort of, like, brutal thrash stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, I hear that. Yeah, the Insurtus also, this band, where this and the Insurtus record literally converges around the Insurtus Bathory cover, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The bizarre Nightmare Bathory songs they do on that record.
Yeah. Bathory tuned down to G.
Yeah.
But so anyway.
Well, yeah, let me get to another sample. So this is off Smedgen. So it's like, this is an EP with like 4 full songs and a lot of like ambient interludes. And Smedgen is the first full song. So I want to talk about kind of the hardcore thing, or very like it's interesting, the kind of DNA of the hardcore in this, because you can see this liminal space they're accessing between early hardcore punk and hardcore as it would divorce itself from punk later down the road, as well as just a ton of classic Celtic Frost. But the way they execute those kinds of riffs is honestly kind of novel. I haven't heard anything quite like it. So let's listen to this sample off Smedgen, and the centerpiece here is going to be this big, like, Celtic Frost hardcore breakdown. And I'm sure this is a part you already love. So let's go. well, Black Metal Guy, this is the last record I ever expected to have a massive crowd kill part on the first song, but here we are. My expectations have been defied.
Yeah.
No, it's so that's awesome. As soon as I heard that, obviously my ears perked up, and I love how it's so primordial, and it connects to so many things that you can headbang to it, you can push mosh to it, or you can literally spin kick the air to it. Mm-hmm. And that's, it really brings all the kids together in that one moment,
That is true, and imagine the carnage.
Oh, yeah. All three of those things should be happening in the pit.
Happening at once.
Simultaneously, yes. Another thing, listening back, that I find interesting is I was describing the blast sections as kind of like war metal parts, but that's not really accurate. What they are is, well, some of them have the kind of pagan bolts or octave thing that you're talking about, but the really kind of nasty, gnarly ones are really more like Second Side of Scum by Napalm Death. Just these hyper-speed chromatic kind of power chord riffs.
The best parts of Scum, which also have howling octaves on them.
Yeah, sometimes they do, definitely. So it's interesting, because I think that's always a component that a lot of people forget about early extreme metal, was how important a lot of the early grindcore stuff was. And I think that it's cool to see some of those ideas come back relatively, quote-unquote, untainted, I like that they just are there as what they are. They're primitive grind riffs, that you would hear from Siege or something, which I think connects to the whole kind of punk vibe of this record.
Yeah, I wrote in the notes black grind or something, because it, does it, what's the grindcore smell test? Well, does it grind? It grinds.
Yeah, it definitely grinds.
So, that makes sense. I mean, certainly you can also just talk about those riffs as blasted out discharge riffs in some way. And, of course, that would be a Napalm Death riff.
I was about to say that. Well, that's just all Napalm Death was for the first album. So.
Yeah, I really loved that, dum, 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 dum. Now, okay, you could do a Panzer Division Marduk version of that, but what that really is kind of like this kind of like blasted, pulsed version of, original discharge riffing.
I was thinking of the even dumber one that's just like over and over again.
The other band that reminds me of or that was doing that with that kind of pulsed one that I was talking about. The other band that this reminds me of is Malveillance, which these guys probably are familiar with because it's so in their specific niche of blown out noise black metal.
Yeah, and there is this whole kind of like outside looking in kind of crust vibe. Looking into crust, not looking into metal.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Like crust ideas being approached from people who speak black metal as a native language.
Yes. Because I was describing in the notes, because what this reminds me of more than anything, like the immediate impression I get is off a lot of the kind of crusty Eastern European death grind stuff that I really enjoy. Coming out of like Poland and Ukraine and stuff like that. Definitely not the same musically, but there's an immediate sort of like animal instinct to that.
Similar kind of kicks. Like, okay, let's yeah.
It's like let's do a song. It's got like nasty grinding blast parts, a couple big breakdowns, maybe some weird shit that's personal to us, and then just kick out the jams, motherfucker.
I think, and I think you're right about Napalm Death. It's weird. To me, when I was younger, and had, sort of was like learning music history or whatever, it seemed obvious to me that Napalm Death was super relevant to all this stuff, right? And then you just sort of forget about them.
Oh, yeah.
In a way, Napalm Death are so irrelevant to black and death metal and to what they've become. And you start to realize, this and that blast beat. I thought Napalm Death invented blast beats. Oh, well, turns out a lot of that was coming from, like, Creator or Repulsion or whatever, right? But, in my head when I was, like, 18 or 19, right, it's like, Napalm Death, blast beats. But it is true that they were really important, and there is cool guitar shit on Scum that is, well worth revisiting.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
But to be fair, regarding Napalm Death and the blast beat, had the blast beat not existed, it would be necessary to create it. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Nobody gets ownership over the blast beat. It's something for the people.
It's what?
It's for the people.
Yeah, for sure. No. So with it was in the water. Everyone was approaching the blast beat. You know, it's So this one is Egan. This is less grindy, more of a focus on the time-honored tradition of the stomp. The track starts off with blasting like a lot of them, but this one's really just about like driving two steps. And we've got one of the more out there or atmospheric moments in the middle, so let's see how they open it up. So what did you make of that big sort of vast open moment in the middle with that kind of like, you know, the chugs and the sort of wailing guitar? It's pretty cool.
I mean, I think I remember that from, you know, my initial listens to this, and I gotta say that's not really my thing, because I think these guys have such a great momentum when they're doing this very straightforward, deliberately primitive stuff. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the section, but for me at least, it's like, that's not what I'm here for on this music, and I think it's like, it's kind of an interrupter between a lot of stuff that I just like more.
When I click on it, it sounds cool, right? Like, I just clicked back to it to make sure I remembered how it sounded like. The thing is, it certainly, the way they're using it to showcase the higher end of the guitar, which otherwise you just hear on the octaves and stuff, and to draw that out is pretty cool. It's not a usual kind of black metal-y gesture to do. If anything, it's kind of like an ever-flowing stream kind of thing to do.
I can see that.
Really punked out version of it, right? You know, you chug on the low note, you throw your hair back, you do some like high string stuff, you chug, you know. It's you stare around with really big eyes at everyone in the audience. But like, it's pretty cool. But you could imagine, I could imagine a version of it with more memorable phrases in it. And I could imagine, I think you're right that, I actually think you're right. Like, it's original, it's original and well done. The other thing I can think of is sort of the tones on Early Enslaved, which is, again, cool. Probably a big reference point here. Actually, Early Enslaved also grinds really hard and has similar kinds of tense, sinuous kinds of melodies in it.
Well, which is sort of a fundamental part of this band's sound. Also, are these kind of almost like, I would call them like almost shamanic kind of winding melodies that can be tucked away inside the blast riffs, or they can be more opened up like that. And here's a great example of that. My segues are getting so good.
Damn.
So here's
I didn't even know you were segueing. That was smooth.
Oh, God. I penetrate you and you don't even know it.
It wasn't me.
Okay, so a song called Hayden. So this is awesome. We're going to go right from the beginning, and the first couple riffs could be taken from arguably the greatest band that never did an album ever, which is Ripikolu. But you'll hear these sort of strange keening dissonant chords at the end of the phrases, which seems to be like a trademark of this band's guitar style, or these sort of abstract endings to conventional riffs. And then you're going to hear some really cool rhythmic variation stuff that goes right back to early mid-era Bathory, this kind of like stop-starting for all those who died type stuff that I know you're a big fan of. So overall, just listen to the way these guys are taking these very old stylistic ideas, late 80s, early 90s, and then recontextualizing them into something that sounds very distinct to this band in particular. For obvious reasons, we're very guitar-centric on the show, but something I actually really appreciate about this album is the fact that despite the mood and the style of this music, the drums aren't sloppy. There's a lot of rigor to them, and I think in this case, like, the precision they're played with actually adds to the kind of, like, intense martial vibe of this music. I think that's really cool. So
also, on the note of things that we always forget to talk about, I think we talk about drums more than vocals. And,
we almost never talk about vocals. It's
yeah,
weird.
in part because that's just that's like, as far as music criticism, that's noob shit, right? But like, the harsh vocals convey an emotion of anguish.
An emotion of anguish, yes, of course.
All right, ding, ding, ding. Anyway, moving on. So the vocals are really good.
I'm not usually a big fan of the like super blown out reverb stuff, but I think it really works here.
it would sound raw without the reverb too. You can tell those are like, and those are vocals that would, black metal bands you hear sort of things like that, but those are very hardcore vocals, and also primitive 80s death, right? Those are or crust vocals. Those are like primitive puke vocals, which are some of my favorites, all right? And he just really, deep sound, lots of fry, vomit, and there's inflection thrown in. I don't know if he's I could imagine this being, a lot of the parts seem written to be yelled while being played. Mm-hmm. I can imagine him just sort of furiously elbow tremming this and yelling, right, to perform live.
No, that's correct. I didn't even pick up on that. Yeah, it definitely does sound like this is designed to be played live with the way the guitars are arranged against the vocals.
Yeah, and so when he does that, you can't do, that means you can't do certain fancy things, but what it does mean is he's embellishing the ad-lib quality of his great. He'll twist around his phrase, or he'll do more of a snarl or whatever to accent certain turns in the guitar part. And that's the sort of thing where when you're playing live, you can be feeding directly off the guitar energy.
Yeah. There's a lot more flexibility to doing it live, where that sort of thing lends itself. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I think, like I said, I pretty much covered it at the top of that sample, but I like the way they're, like I said, those first couple riffs, straight out of Ripicolo's kind of catalog. Mm-hmm. Just those, like, primitive, kind of, like, dust-covered, almost doomy death metal riffs. But then they start throwing those big delay-washed guitar twists at the end of the phrases and stuff, and it's interesting. The ultimate vibe is something that's, like, very martial and barbaric, but it's kind of mystical, too. It's understated, but it's there, and I think that adds a lot of depth to it.
Yeah, man, it's like taking the mushrooms from the, taking the mushrooms from the sorcerer, so you can see the arrows coming in slow motion.
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right, we are back with what is apparently the fourth full-length by Luminous Veil, Vespers for the Loom and Lain. These guys have done 4 full-length records over the past few years, which is something I usually, kind of raise an eyebrow at, for no real good reason. I mean, people are capable of being prolific and being good. So I had never heard of these guys before. Oh, I forgot to mention up top, this is released on BMC Productions, Black Metal Catalog Productions, apparently. And this is extremely difficult to describe because it feels like there's all sorts of influences coming from all over the map on this. The core of it is based on a certain sort of post-black sensibility, in that there's a lot of emo inflection to a lot of the riffs, some sort of expansive, kind of wandering post-rock style song structures. But then there's a big influence from what I think is kind of deep-cut 2000s symphonic black metal. Like, I go to a band that used to be extremely popular and nobody talks about anymore called Mirror Throne.
Literally never heard of.
It was a big deal in like the early to mid 2000s, and then the guy kind of stopped doing stuff and it just kind of fell away with time. But it's very interesting. It was kind of on the cutting edge of being able to do bedroom black metal that sounded good and professional. Mm-hmm. So this guy had a lot of technical know-how, especially for the time, and was just producing these records in his home. So there's a lot of that. There's, I think, a lot of Winterfilleth, a lot of...
Oh, that's probably true. Slow Winterfilleth.
Yeah. There's a lot of riffs on this that are sort of patterned after the Swart Raven kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. As well as just a lot of, kind of like Finnish or Cascadian black metal. And I know in aggregate, all of this put together sounds like a fucking nightmare. It's like, it's a lot of things we don't generally enjoy put together in one place. But ultimately, I've been listening to this several times now, and I think this has a lot to offer. I don't think the kinks are perfectly worked out yet. I have issues with the record, but lately, one of my big tests for do I really like a record is, does it make me want to pick up a guitar and explore some of those ideas? And this one did. Because they have spins on the typical kind of post-black arrangements that I think are pretty unique, even if they're relatively simple in execution. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I found this one really interesting. I know you've got complicated feelings about this one, so I'll flip it over to you.
I suppose a record like this should evoke complicated feelings, right? It's called Vespers for the Loom and Lain. It's like a record to have a complicated feel to. Yeah, man, I don't know. Like, this one threw me for a loop. I expected, just based on what you wrote in the notes, which is, I'm pretty curious about your opinion, because I think it appears to be a synthesis of almost everything you hate in a package I think is remarkably good. That's what the death metal guy wrote to me in the notes. And yeah, that's definitely, I can see that being true. I don't hate it. And I think that there's a lot of it is quite skillful. And I don't just mean that in the sort of like from a distance saying, oh, that's well done, right? You know, mm-hmm. It's like there's some very cool ideas here. A thing that stuck out to me is the slow Winterfilleth thing definitely hits for me and resonates with something I heard about it. Where it's like, I'm not familiar with Mirror Throne or a lot of stuff like that. What it sounds to me like the main scaffolding in the guitar parts is this kind of way of doing these drawn out melodies that you would get in sort of romantic funeral doom or gothic death doom, even stuff like, I always got to plug October Tide. I re-listened to that record last week, Rain Without End. It's fucking brilliant. October Tide, or like, you know, you talk about November's Doom and shit like that. This sort of these kind of doom riffs with these big, slow, slashing chords where you can see the guitars just sort of punching the guitar, and then these long, drawn-out leads, right? And the leads have these kind of medieval Dorian scale melodies, and they're full of dolorous lamenting, right? And that seems to be the baseline musical element of it. And the thing is, when I hear that, I'm like, okay, sign me the fuck up. I like that stuff, right? You know, this sort of like very English sounding medieval, kind of elegiac medieval stuff. Sure, cool. And what this band seems to do to me is like they take that way of writing melodies, which you would also get in Winterfilleth, especially those slow parts where they kind of do whip out the tandem guitars and get a little indulgent. Mm-hmm. I mean, which are also, there are times when that makes me turn it off with Winterfilleth, but like, I feel like, especially on the latest record, I really liked a lot of those parts. So that's cool, and you know, but the mood here is certainly a lot more Winterfilleth than like, you know, Peaceville or whatever, right? Like, this is pretty positive music in some sense, right? It's very solemn. Yeah. It's still solemn, which I think is important, but there is a kind of exuberant, ecstatic feel to it, right?
Yeah, I was going to use the word ecstatic.
Well, maybe
I would agree with
ecstasy.
That.
Slow
there's
ecstasy.
There's a sort of joyous quality to this. It's interesting, like, reading the lyrics, which are...
I guess I'd be joyous, too, if I had a wistful contraction in the heart at night.
It's interesting.
I feel joyous every time I have one of those. So.
Been there, Chief.
Yeah.
So the lyrics tend to be sort of, like, emotive and introspective, but then I feel like the music is, you know, this sort of joyous outburst of I don't know, it's like I said in the notes, it's like, is this what liturgy would sound like if they were good?
I didn't get that. I didn't get that.
No, the idea of, you know, black metal or something like black metal as a vessel for, you know, kind of joy, and expansiveness,
Well,
which is
a
obviously
band-
not. Yeah.
A band that does do that this guy probably listens to is Obsequiae.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that at all.
Oh, you'd like it a lot. It's really, it's like the early Dark Tranquillity stuff but by guys who spent some time studying actual medieval music. It's
Okay.
pretty one-dimensional, but the one trick is a good trick. And in
I
a
love
certain mood-
bands that do one trick really well.
but they're very elaborate riffs, and in and they're paced much differently from regular black metal songs. They have this kind of loping mid-tempo pace that's closer to comes from listening to how medieval songs move, and the mood is very exuberant.
Okay, I can get into
And
that.
so this is kind of like Obsequiae, and the other thing I'm thinking, given that this band is named Luminous Veil, I'm wondering if it has any inspiration from Ethereal Shroud, right? Maybe they were using the same highbrow internet black metal name generator, but that guy, he's disappeared for a long time, but he's returning soon, which is cool. We'll definitely cover that. But is a black funeral doom fusion that sounds very English in this way that's sort of difficult to put your finger on, but you know it when you hear it. And has a sort of, it's bleak, but it's much bleaker than this, but it's also ecstatic bleakness. It's just like, oh God, you look up and you see all the ravens swirling over the old, over the remains of the abbey, and, clouds moving overhead, and you're just like, yes.
Okay. Yeah, this sounds like two bands I really need to check out.
Yeah, no, you'd like that too, and it's very earnest, and it will appeal to post-black people, But it also that last record came out years ago. It was ahead of a number of curves. So yeah, this reminds me of that too, and with that you can hear these funeral doom inflections in the melodies, but they're all sped up. So I think that this band is doing something kind of like that in terms of the basic form of the riffs. I'll give you an example of that now. I've kind of already tried to describe what they're like structurally. These elongated capital G Gothic cathedral kind of riffs, right? The problem is, to me, that these riffs are fucking weird, man. They never end, and I'm not sure I get it. So his particular version of this style. So we're going to start on Wistful Contraction Wistful Contraction in the Heart of Blight. Well, that's a good time. We're going to check out 2 minutes from here. This is well into the track. And we're going to start on a nice stompy version of the main theme, a little blast beat, and then let's see where things go from there.
At first I was a little confused about your relating it to kind of romantic doom death or funeral doom stuff, but then listening to that again, I realized what this really sounds like, especially that riff and the sort of complex arrangement of it. What it reminds me of is something we listened to right before our break. I played a sample of Warning, which has similar...
Yeah, it does sound like Warning.
Lingering kind of sprawling doom riffs that never really resolve in the way you expect them to, you know?
Yeah, and Asunder did that a bit too, but those were more like just heavy riffs. Warning had it, but it had this folky kind of thing that was stringing it together.
Another British band, so that seems to be a thread here.
Interesting. I bet this guy likes Warning then. Yeah, and I mean this is folky too, but much more at second hand as processed by Winterfilleth and doom bands, right?
Yeah.
But so what's weird to me about that is like, there's this continual staggering, lurching feeling to the riffs.
It never settles in.
And, you're supposed to, let the riff swing out over these big chords and then reel it back in and all that. And they're supposed to have syncopation and push and pull. That's true, and that's awesome that he knows how to do that, right? Because many bands can't do that, right? But, and then there are these broken beats, like, on the drum machine.
Yeah.
Which, sound like, I don't know, man. Like,
it's almost breakbeat type stuff.
Yeah. It sounds to me, I think those are not helping. And they are, I think maybe a certain kind of more consistent metal-esque drumming could help give these riffs, or especially a live drummer, right? A live drummer could write musical fill patterns that would help shape the riffs in relation to them.
That's interesting. I think this is just going to be a pure difference in taste thing, but one of my favorite aspects of this record is the drum programming and how kind of strange it is.
God.
I really love the strange kind of like janky mechanical quality of the drum machine, like how it's so maximalist compared to a lot of the riffing.
Well, you can't say the drumming isn't, like, it's definitely original and it's definitely authentic, right? I mean,
yeah, it's because it doesn't sound like a drum machine programmed by a drummer, but it sounds like a very painstaking process of translating something in the head out onto your digital audio workstation, and the weirdness of it is something that I really appreciate.
I don't know. I think it sounds like the outcome of listening to Venetian Stairs and fucking around a garage band. I guess what I find the drums to be actively working against the guitars throughout the record.
Okay.
And, but the guitars, and I wonder with the drums, I mean, my more, jokes aside, I wonder with the drums, it's like, maybe he has this very limited, he's only got so much he can do with the drum machine, and the idea is, I know that I don't want to have one of those projects where people just use canned drum beats, right? Mm-hmm. That's totally respectable, right? And at the same time, he also knows he's writing these kinds of long, developing riffs that have these swaying rhythms in them that straight beat-oriented drumming isn't really well suited to. So he's like, I need to try to make the drum programming better and create these sort of intricate rhythms that play to the riffs. Like, it sounds to me almost like he's trying to imitate musician-y drumming with a drum machine.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
I almost wonder if he's trying too hard to make it good and interesting on the drums.
I think it might just be a matter of influences, because I think another thing that I'm hearing on this record, and this is going to be like totally outside your wheelhouse, but have you ever listened to like a Neobliviscaris?
I don't know what that is.
They're an Australian group who do like the sort of like technical extreme metal that like metalheads don't really listen to anymore. You know what I mean? It's like it's black metal for gent kids, you know. And it's pretty cool for what it is. But I think that something like that, with this very like overbearing kind of progressive or jazzy quality, is probably something they're listening to and trying to kind of translate on the drums. And I would say this is probably just like a matter of tasting. But I do have a sample later on that I think, will kind of at least improve my point about the drum machine. It's like, okay, so there's something offered here that can't be offered by a human.
Okay, I accidentally got sidetracked by the drums, but this sort of applies to the guitars too. Is that I feel like the riffs just start after we get through the blast beats. There, the riff starts to sort of disintegrate. It goes through all these. There are all these little embellishments and frills and kind of callbacks and things that are all rhythmically staggered in this strange way, and they tend to continually sound like they're interrupting each other, and all the individual phrases are often great, right? The main riff has great individual phrases, but even the main riff as it develops will sort of have this sort of drop in, drop out, self-interrupt, tweak, and I feel like he has the compositional skill to take real melodic units that are substantial and to make long developmental sequences from them, but these seem to like lose power as they go.
Okay, I think I understand what you mean. I have a different assessment of it, but I can definitely get where you're coming from. So
point being, I'm being a jerk on this one. My overall feeling about the record is more positive, right? You know what I mean? It's like, I like the style. In a lot of ways, I like the style, and I like riffing like this, and I think he's a good bit better at it than many people who play versions of it that I would find more listenable. And so the question is how, I guess to a certain extent, this is... I do not, not only do I not hate this, I think I'm saying this from a perspective of tough love criticism, where it's like, I kind of like the thing you're doing.
I gotcha. Well, in that case, I'll bring in one of my samples that's a little bit more straightforward. And, you know, I think it's kind of the proof in the pudding that these guys have real chops in terms of making sort of post-black riffs that have real energy and real elegance behind them, and have that elemental quality that, you know, something that we've said in some form or fashion on the show is like, if you're a real black metal guitarist, you can make an amazing riff out of like 4 notes, you know? And I think these guys pull that off with surprising regularity. So let's go to Balms on the Wellspring Scar. So you're going to hear a lot of stuff you've kind of heard before, but the way they resolve the riffs tends to be different from the standard post-black modus operandi. Obviously, these guys are listening to like a lot of Death Heaven, that kind of thing, but Death Heaven tries to approximate black metal riffs. These guys are doing a lot of the like really fast, intense stuff is just screamo riffs played unbelievably fast and intensely, you know, very Heaven in Her Arms style, which, as everyone who's listened knows, is like one of my favorite bands. So let's listen to this one here, and also let's pay attention to the synths, which are a really big part of this record and almost never just back up the guitars. They're always playing around with different melodies and different kind of harmonic ideas against the riffs. So let's try this one out, and I'm curious what you think about this. Yeah, so what I think is interesting there is that obviously a lot of those riffs are opening like standard post-black arrangements, the big, glistening, soaring lead line. But they always tend to conclude in a different matter. Something that's a little bit deeper, a little bit more harmonically interesting. So you're getting kind of the big post-black kicks that everybody likes, but there's more depth to it, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, just immediately, yeah, I think they do better when there is, although he has a talent for writing those long line, swinging doom riffs, I think the band is firing on all cylinders when they're doing the denser stuff, when they're filling in more space. And also when the middle space between the guitar parts and the drums is filled in more.
Oh, you know what? These guys are probably listening to a lot of Krallis, aren't they?
I have no idea, man. I don't think we know. I'm doing some Metal Archive stalking right now, and it's I'm not sure actually. I have
well, there's something about the sound quality of this where they're kind of
oh, it's the Krallis's arty imitation of shitty sound.
Well, just the idea of like having this sort of vast emptiness in the mid-range, this sort of like white-hot, high-pitched guitar tone against the drums.
Yeah, I actually could see that. And Krallis are actually decent when they use their powers for good rather than evil. Or I suppose for evil rather than good. But yeah, so I don't know, maybe. But I definitely liked the keyboards layering on. You mentioned Caladan Brood as an influence on this. I imagine that's one reason the drums are so aggressively programmed here, is that it's a style convention.
Yeah, that was something I forgot to mention. Yeah,
the breakbeaty quality is eccentric to this band, but the idea of having overtly very programmed drums and just kind of reveling in it—that's Caladan and Summoning, right? Or especially Caladan.
Yeah, especially on some of the slower parts of this music, I think that it's Summoning. But I mean, 10 years ago we would have said Summoning, but now everybody listens to Caladan Brood.
No, it sounds more like Caladan Brood.
Yeah.
And, that's probably one reason I don't like those parts, right?
Yeah, I'm the Caladan Brood defender, so... But sort of, so going off
but
that...
But I did listen to some Summoning a while back, and I did like it.
Summoning's good, man. It took me a long time to get into it. I think Caladan Brood just has those big fucking pop hooks, Mm-hmm. Summoning doesn't have those. Which can be to the benefit or the detriment of the band, depending on who you're talking to. Mm-hmm. So, kind of extending directly off that, let's go to my next sample, where we both have samples off this song. So I think it's the best song on the record. This is off The Wicker Pall, and I chose something off the very beginning of this track, and you chose something towards the mid. But here's an example of where I think the drum machine as an instrument is used beautifully. And if there's an idea I want these guys to expand on, it's this stuff, where the drum machine goes full spaz mode, and it just becomes this maximalist, ecstatic thing. It's so wonderful to me.
All right, cool.
listening to that again, I'm realizing why I like this album so much, because it is a metal interpretation of certain styles of electronic music that I love a lot. Like, this really does, from a structural base, have a lot to do with a lot of weird breakcore stuff that I really like.
Yeah, well, that passes a certain kind of test in that it gives me the feels. So, I find myself won over by their version of post-black melodies there. Right?
Yeah.
It's very hard to listen to the and with those little other little textures flying away around it. That's just I mean, I'm not overwhelmed by it, but it's nice, right? And it's pretty irresistible, right? The drumming there, I agree, is also cool. Could they make it sound more like breakcore?
They could.
You know what I mean? Could they, this is a case of okay, so maybe this band is straddling a line where it's on the one hand, you can be a metal band and use drum machines. On the other hand, you can use drum machines in the way that people who really listen to and play electronic music use them. For instance, like the guys from Fluids, right? Mm-hmm. This appears to be stuck somewhat in no man's land. They really listen to electronic music, they understand electronic music, but it appears that the both on the sort of, in terms of the gear they're using and ability, there's maybe the will is exceeding the means right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible.
I wonder if they just commit to building that part of the sound, maybe those other parts would sound better, and this part sounds really good. I would like it better if it had more proper electronic sound palette, right?
Yeah, make the kick drum a distorted 808.
Yeah, don't exactly. So do all that. I wouldn't change. You wouldn't have to change a single snare hit or cymbal on any of that. Just take it from the part of Bandcamp that says Caladan Brood Kit and drag and drop it to the part that says Detroit Techno Kit. There you go, done.
I definitely get that, because actually what this really reminds me of, ironically, both in melodic style, as well as the kind of breakcore drum programming, is a project called the Flashbulb, who I really liked in my early 20s. I got to revisit that stuff.
That's the kind of name that would have existed when we were in our early 20s,
Yeah, absolutely.
The Flashbulb. Flashbulb was a great song by the Murder City Devils, too.
Yeah. So the Flashbulb, he did kind of breakcore style drums, but with these very to borrow a word from you, elegiac kind of synth melodies over the top that tended to be very slow compared to the drumming underneath it, which is a similar kind of dynamic these guys like to use.
Oh, that sounds good.
Oh, it's very good. It might be too sentimental for you, but give it a shot. You might like it.
Yeah, but also with electronics, it's different genre to genre, and also and fast, frantic drumming, slow elegiac melodies over it. Well, that's where black metal went in the years after that, right?
Yeah, that's true.
it makes sense as a convergence here, I think. I think you're selling me on that. But certainly I think the parts that are more, I don't know, could you make the slow parts more metally and keep the breakcore parts really breakcore-y? Or, I don't know. But this was cool. The drums there are cool, and it allows the drums to do things. The goal seems to be throughout to get the drums to follow the guitars. Mm-hmm. And, to have the drums playing in ways that are inflected and melodic and dynamically rhythmic rather than playing beats or, being the rhythm section.
I think that's an important thing, is I think the drum machine is a central instrument to this music in a way that it usually isn't in metal.
Yeah.
I think that it basically has as much importance as the guitars in this stuff.
Yeah. So just give the drum machine a little love. But yeah, so I think that part was pretty cool. That was explosive late summer energy, man.
Yeah.
So now we're going to the later in the Wicker Pall. There's another part of this record I like a lot I think in Balms on the Wellspring later, where it just drops to a like sort of driving boop ta, and the vocals get really aggressive. Mm-hmm. I liked that part a lot. That reminded me of like the few and far between, but the good parts of Agalloch.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there are a few songs on the old Agalloch that I really like, or like Ashes Against the Grain I listened to when I was just getting into that stuff.
I'm guessing these guys probably like Agalloch a lot.
I think they like Agalloch. Yeah, I mean there was a song called Not Unlike the Waves that I still rate. I think.
Oh, that's kind of a classic. Yeah,
it's a great song. That just that just rolls, right? But so there are those moments where it's like, oh yeah, John Hamm does vicious vocals, right? The Wicker Pall, we get these. You're going to start off again in the lurching, the sort of big lurching guitars, but often when they're doing that, right, I almost feel like the riffs, the melodies keep sort of like hanging over a really great idea. They keep sort of like, floating over this awesome part that's in the offing, like they're building towards it. Here, it drops down and locks in a pretty unexpected way, but it's heavy and cool. So yeah, like that was a drop, right? And to get just this full sort of alt rock passage.
Yeah.
Even the murmured, kind of distant, muffled emo vocals, right? Those are almost like 90s kind of emo and post-hardcore kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Or like spoken word part in a Mogwai song, mumbly guy with the square glasses and the loud amp, right? And I find that perfectly appropriate here. I think normally that would be a move I would not like at all. But in the context of the general mood they've established, and sure, why not just why not just say the thing that's implicit, right?
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that I like about these guys. They're just embracing the shit,
Yeah. And the drop is sophisticated because it's like, yeah, I think there's something about that. Like, these guys are really good at rhythm. There's just something about it that doesn't land everywhere for me. But here, there's this. So they've got the original riff has this lurch rhythm, and then the snare placement in the super slowed down 1-2 beat, right, mid-tempo beat, the trudge rhythm. These pull against each other in a really interesting way. Like, it drops, but the emphasis isn't where you expect it to be. and it drives forward hard like it would in a sort of 1-2-2-step kind of thing, or a double bass section, but it does it at this... It does it almost while it's moving backwards at the same time. Like, it's a very weird feeling.
Yeah, and I think that's what I like so much about this record, is that it's always playing around with ideas that are kind of conventional, but, it always finds a way to kind of upset your expectations. There's always there's a big setup for something, and then it moves in a slightly different direction. Not one that, ruins where you were expecting it to go, but one that kind of teases out other ideas from what might already be expected. And I think that's what keeps me interested in this record. It's, moment to moment, there's always something different happening. And I think they're still exploring exactly what they want to do. And I think they will... I mean, they've only been a band for a few years now, so, it's still kind of gestating. But I think that given a little bit more time, we're going to get something really big out of these guys, and I'm excited to see what it might be. All right, we are back after some Tårne Spirer. Is that how you pronounce it?
I don't know. Yeah, Tårne Spirer. Oh, that Spirer is probably German. But yeah, no. So that was the black metal mooded techno project, which by two guys, one of whom is Jesper Baggerfeed from Broder and other bands. Broder we reviewed earlier, and other Korpsand bands.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so next up we've got Serpentrance with their first full-length record, Akra Tapeinosis, out on Gods of War Productions. And to me it feels like Gods of War are sort of positioning themselves at the forefront of gloomy, no longer caverncore, but sort of cavernous black death metal. You might be familiar with them. We've covered a couple Gods of War records before, the closest to Serpentrance being the Cultum in Terradum record that we covered last year, a band who also just recently came out with a new full-length. So Serpentrance is a Russian band. They did one EP before back in 2015, and now they're back with a full-length. And it seems like we've both written in the notes, we're covering a lot of this kind of stuff lately. And it feels like there is a new wave emerging of this gloomy, kind of ritualistic Black Death stuff. And my hot take is that, yeah, this is a new sort of style forming. And it's based off of a few things. There's certain ingredients to the style, and I think the difference between these different bands is the ratios that they're mixing in. And I think that the big ingredients are going to be orthodox black metal, war metal, and old school kind of like Profanatica or Demoncy, like slow, minimal Black Death stuff from the 90s. Now, these guys in particular seem very invested in the Profanatica Demoncy side of things, but they're augmenting it with a lot of sort of minimal Death Doom stuff, like almost sludgy at some times. And it's interesting. I think that it gets a lot better towards the back half of the record, but I'm interested in your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have profound thoughts on this. However, I definitely like it. I do want to point out that the band name could also be pronounced Serpentrance.
Could be either one, yeah.
Yeah. So we definitely covered a lot of this stuff recently. I thought that this band did a good job of staying slow while maintaining momentum, which is a difficult thing and something that's very important to me with stuff like this. As far as the Profanatica Demoncy thing and the Orthodox inflection being big influences in the style, although this has no Orthodox in it. I think I've got a sense of what another ingredient is. Oh, you did mention war metal, right? Mm-hmm. But like specifically like New Zealand and Canadian war metal in right around when in our sort of early 20s days, right? Yeah. So like 2010 or 2012, stuff that kind of had its moment and flickered out, in part because Diocletian sort of went inactive for a while. Mm-hmm. Some of those projects, like a variety. So I'm going to mention them, but Witch Christ is I guess I'm doing a segue. This band really reminds me, Serpentrance really reminds me of this whole vein of sort of war metal that was obviously influenced by blasphemy and that general tradition, but had a very, very different sound from your typical Nuclear War or Hell's Headbanger stuff. It was at the same time more riff-oriented while also being more minimalistic and droning, maybe more after certain kinds of black metal effects, but very tuned very down. Heavy emphasis at times on big stomp and mid-tempo sections. And, you know, Diocletian was kind of this flagship for all those bands, and Diocletian did Ysundrian, and they moved towards this more kind of regular death metal-y sound, and for a minute, they were sort of the darling of the metal establishment, which, you know, was pretty amusing. Right, but, you know, they sort of had their, you know, they had their thing, they went dormant, and now they're back. The last Diocletian album was absolutely killer. It had Imperath from Black Witchery on it. But along with that, right, there's Antediluvian. Well, guess who's coming back this year? Antediluvian, which is really cool. And there was this band called Witchchrist who who shared members with Diocletian and some of the other New Zealand bands, and seemed to be heading somewhere, but they did their first record, Beheaded Ouroboros, and now it's not even on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
It is on a Bandcamp, but it's not even on YouTube. They recorded a second one, and the second one, kind of like Ysundrian, was a move towards more conventionally death metal sound, and didn't interest me at all. But the first one's incredible, and this band, like, Serpentrance really reminds me of them, in some important ways. Not that it sounds like a clone of that, but it sounds like the coolest things about this one strain of war metal that at one time was very trendy and then disappeared are returning, and all that scene was always kind of different from the cavernous Black Death thing, and so now maybe it's one fueling influence here. So let's listen to Clothed in Abomination from 13 Minutes to the Fade Out. This is, second track on this record. Even the fast part sounded slow, right?
Yeah.
They do a really good job. This is the thing they do again and again. They're good at creating, doing these sort of just heavy, open, just heavy ringing chords, whole note ringing chords with some syncopation thrown in. over the blasting, right? And the blasting is often there's some great staggered blasting in the next sample. The drummer has a lot of freedom and has clearly been told to just do his thing.
Yeah.
And like the drums are very forward in this sound in a good way, and also have a nice kind of organic woody kind of tone. But the big thing that just so the slowness of the heaviness, or the slowness of the fastness, reminds me of Witch Christ. The sort of drone quality of those chiming, repeating chords, but especially also just that 6/8 breakdown in the middle, right? Just switch to the right. Just this moment that is not just exciting, but surprisingly rockin' in some ways. And it's like, and that slows it down, but it still has a barreling momentum and a headbanging quality to it. And also just the tone is super low and super solid in a way that is different from the classic incantation imitators.
Yeah, no, I think I think a good like smell test for this style, especially when they're trying to do it a little bit slower, is you should have the effect of a 45 RPM vinyl played on 33. Which this does. It feels like it's straining against its own tempo. Even though it's so slow for the most part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like something that is. Or the other feeling I have is like something that is very heavy, moving at like just at a slightly unnerving pace.
Yeah, it's moving faster than it should. But...
Yeah, Killdozer, right?
Yeah, I get that.
And but in this case, it's this kind of also this liquid flowing motion, right? This is with this and with Witch Christ and these bands that have this ritual feel. It's some like it's like liquid flowing in the underworld.
It's loping, right? I like to call it.
Oh yeah, this is very loping for sure. Yes, it could also be just sort of like, demon loping. So here we go from Witch Christ's Temple of War.
Well, I mean, dude, why are you not listening to Profanautica in this case?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, that's one of those things. I just think of it as a U band, so I never go back and listen to it,
No, this is down-tuned Profanautica all the way.
That makes sense.
It's good, but it's like, oh yeah, I definitely, like, Paul Ledney is their idol. Well, actually, although, while we're doing deep cut shit, my favorite underground witch band is Witch Tomb. Did you ever listen to them?
No.
Oh, Witch Tomb. They did a couple records. They actually did a 7-inch with Pro Sanctus and Fairy back in the day, before they broke up.
Oh, but so they actually are kind of in this vein.
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah, Witch Tomb. No, it's the same style of music. Yeah, no. They did a record the year before this, actually, in 2009 called Crippled Messiah. And that was a big favorite of mine for a lot of years, just for like everyday listening type shit.
So you would say that like I was on point with the Witch Christ reference, but that it is more like the stuff that you already said this sounds like than I thought.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously everybody's going to have like a slightly different play on it, but yeah, this is basically like Profanatica worship type shit.
One which is funny because I'm not sure that came up a lot back in the day, but it makes I think Profanatic was underappreciated back then. The one salient distinction people will be able to tell is just there's that certain something, which means that Witch Christ is war metal and this isn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
is not very. Witch Christ has that just overloaded buzzing guitar and goes for extreme density. This is much more spaced out, sort of relaxed almost, and going for that just pure sludgy low tone.
Well, I think Serpentrance is like, I mean, one of my arguments about this is like, I think at their heart they're a doom band, you know. And I think that's one of the things that makes them distinctive is that obviously they've got these like fast tension building passages, but I think the heart of this band lives in the really slow tempo stuff, which I think is something we disagree on.
Oh, no, well, no, I think that's actually for the next band. That's Thaumaturgy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Who knows? It's cavernous Black Death stuff. But yeah, no, I think I really like the super doomy parts on this record. But I know you've got another one.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it's it's me, so I like the fast part. But this is on the Tårne Shrines of God. This all has even more of this sort of let the drummer do his thing kind of approach. This is one of the faster numbers. They've already run through the attack riffs, the basic sort of aggressive verse riff type blasting riffs. And what's next? More attack riffs, right? But this is where a lot of the this is basically like the developmental section of the song. It just sort of keeps slowly ripping.
All right.
that staggered blasting in the middle.
Oh, I thought you were going to point that out. So yeah, the like just big held chords over over the kind of thrash beat kind of thing. Yeah, that's like
a fractured thrash beat. You know.
Yeah, that's like an Archgoat thing.
That makes sense. Archgoat's another band that, insofar as I've heard, you played me some a while ago, and I was like, this fucking kills.
Yeah, it's an Archgoat. Or Profanatica. Yeah, Profanatica would do that too.
You know, I would say I haven't been in a very war metal mood, but I actually have. So maybe I need to start listening to them. Yeah.
I mean, you should just listen to Archgoat. I mean, that's just like a lot of things you like in one place.
No, it is for sure. I mean, I do think one of the best things on the internet is Rauta's interview with the guy from Archgoat.
Oh, where they're just hanging out under the tree drinking beer.
Hanging out under the tree, beautiful windy day, drinking some beers. It's just like...
Yeah, that's a good interview.
It's like people think of Valhalla as all skulls getting split and, you know, like massive bosoms heaving.
And it is those things.
It is those things. It is those things. But there's... Valhalla's that too, right?
Yeah, it's chilling out, drinking a beer with your boy under the under Yggdrasil, you know. But no, I kind of like the thing that they do a sort of fake out. You think they're going to break into the Doom riff like at the beginning of the sample, but it's actually at the end. You know, they just keep stacking these sort of iterative, primitive war metal riffs on top of each other. And
the drumming's almost jazzy.
Yeah, because they're doing a very strange kind of rhythmic inflection on the riff there. It's like it's constantly pulling ahead and falling behind the drums, even within the same riff. I don't know if it's just them just like doing it very casually or if there's a very precise kind of timing, but it wavers the same way every time. So I think it's deliberate.
Yeah, I mean, the staggered thing on the blast is really cool. You know, I guess what I would say is like, okay, they may essentially be a Doom band, but can they keep being a Doom band who frequently plays fast parts very slow?
Yeah,
you know what I mean. I feel like they do that so well. That's important to the sound here.
I can definitely see that. You know, it definitely helps to break it up.
For sure, yeah. Like, and I mean. You know, stuff like that, more than, you know, I don't think this band needs to emphasize, you know, standard type blast riffing, right? But they don't really. You know.
Well, I think what you're getting at is that the variation in tempo helps to provide a variation that the riffs don't, because ultimately most of this is extremely simple from a guitar standpoint.
Yeah, most of the riffs are dum dum da dum 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 dum.
Yeah, they're just these very simple kind of primitive like Profanatica arrangements. So how do you create variation without kind of compromising the rigor of that guitar technique? Well, you play around with tempo and rhythm. Yeah. So let's get into slow shit. Because my favorite parts of this record are actually the really slowed down stuff.
And yours is all from later in the album, right?
Yeah. The back half of this record really slows down, or at least its slow parts, I think, hit me a little heavier. So let's go to the track Underneath Babylon. And this is where the record starts to get really interesting to me, because these guys have a very defined sense of early doom death riffing. So you're going to hear some stuff that sounds kind of like Incantation at the front of this sample. Of course, everyone's going to sound kind of like that doing this style. But then they start breaking that riff down, and where it ends up is sort of like Mental Funeral era Autopsy, which is a very strange thing to hear in this style of music. I think that the heart of this band is in like early doom death, and especially the really malignant, nasty sides of it. So let's give this a shot, and then we'll talk a little bit more about like primitive death metal as an influence. Yeah, so I think you can see what I mean, especially with that closing riff. That's much more just straight old school slowed down death metal than you typically hear in this style. I think the roots of this band are, you know, I think there's a tendency to think of this style as being basically black metal, you know, which can be attributed to, as we like to call on the show, you know, black metal hegemony over extreme metal. Yeah. But really, I think a lot of this music is really much closer to old school death metal than black metal in the way it's actually articulated.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's true for most of this stuff. That might be a defining characteristic of most of the things in this style. Maybe like Kaon would qualify as kind of more of a black metal band.
Yeah.
But I mean, the overall vibe for most of them is clearly much more death metal, and the riffing style and all, yes, on this. Or what was that excellent Putrid Cult band?
Oh, God.
The one that we both fucking loved, and then
with the werewolves on the cover.
Yeah, no, not the werewolves. That's Sorry Vilk. But
okay, who never sent me the shirt I ordered.
Uh-oh. Well, you know, they're still
cool. Whatever, that's fine. They can rip me off for a shirt.
They're still hunting the beast with which they'll make the shirt. I don't know. There was that band. It was a Polish band, and I think it was on Putrid Cult. Oh yeah, Upon the Altar.
Yeah. No, something I referenced in the notes. Yeah, no. Upon the Altar is extremely death metal, but it's interesting how like anything kind of like primitive and straightforward is, you know, considered black metal these days. Like we didn't do that in death metal.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, that has got to be super annoying. That if I were the death metal guy, I would certainly find that triggering.
Well, and another thing that adds to is the like squalling, like Slayer style lead guitar stuff, which is all across this record.
I was thinking like you were saying like this is the slow part, and I was thinking, oh god, I'm going to be bored. But you know, that stuff I wouldn't even call for the most part. The last riff is slow. But I wouldn't even call most of that the slow part. It's just like pretty dynamic, down-tempo crushing.
Yeah.
It's like, and that sort of like I mean, that sort of just like that itself. The sort of chugs that come in, the sort of crisp like phrasal or like it's really cool chopped up chug motif that just repeats right before the slowdown. That has this like wailing Slayer over it. That whole section could just be like abstracted Rain and Blood.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of like lead guitar stuff across this record, and it's almost always just wailing pinch harmonics and shit.
Hell yeah! Finally, people are recognizing what was important about Slayer.
It's straight, just like concrete wins guitar noise, you know, rather than, you know, a lead as we typically understand it. Which is, again, like when we were talking about the Broder record, that's like primitive deathrash technique, you know, which is interesting. You know, it's like, it's interesting.
It's something I'd like to hear black metal bands use more. But yes, it is primitive.
Well, I mean, they did back in the 90s, but then we've all forgotten about that. You know?
Yeah,
it's like, no, it's just like, I mean, that's one of the things I find so interesting about this record is how, if you actually break down the musical DNA, you get past the incantation and the profanatica, etc., and the remainder has a lot more to do with autopsy and old obituary than it does most black metal. So, to get to my last sample, you mentioned something very important to this record that really comes into full perspective on this final sample. Black metal guy, despite your name, I've heard you like chugs.
I must confess, death metal guy, I've received a demerit from the sepulchral order for my preference for chugs.
Well, right now we're going to go to the final track on this record called the Black Dawn of Sophia, and we're going to hear some chugs with a Z at the end. That's how chuggy they are. And I'm going to make the claim right now that if this is not at least in some sense, a quote from Wormphlegm, I will eat my ass on air. I will find a way to contort my body.
Don't make him do it. He will do it. He
absolutely do it.
He listens to power electronics. He'd love an excuse.
So let's listen to some extremely dank chugs that I believe are probably directly from old Torture Doom stuff. You like them chugs with a Z, don't you?
I do. Yeah. Don't
So
tell
that
the
is-
boys of the order.
I won't. I will never reveal the Wu-Tang secret, Black Metal Guy. But so yeah, no, so I think that chug in particular, and the way it kind of squalls at the end, is probably from Wormphlegm. I mean, a lot of people have done shit like that, but there's something about the way they arrange the vocals over it, which makes me think it might be taken directly from the source. Listening to this again, what it really reminds me of is the Anatomia record we covered a few months back, Corporeal Torment, which was another primitive kind of autopsy-style Doom Death record that trended towards Torture Doom territory. And I actually just pulled them up on Metal Archives, and Anatomia apparently did a split with Ruin just recently, just like a few weeks ago. Ruin, another favorite nowadays band of mine that we covered last year, so makes perfect sense for them to go together. But yeah, no, I think that just listening to stuff like that, to me, the heart of this band lives in the slowest, most crushing parts of the music. The faster, kind of like Archgoat type stuff is cool, but I like it as a tension builder or a bridge between these massive kind of Doom Death sections.
Well, I can't really argue with that massive Doom Death section.
Yeah, it's just I love the audacity of opening the track like that. It's like usually there's some preparation and like lubrication for when a chug like that comes in. It's like, no, we're doing it right from the top, baby. We're just going into it. And like half of the song is just those chugs going on. It continues throughout the entire track, and I really like that. I like this band's deliberate appreciation of extremely primitive ideas. You know, it's retardedly evil, and that's great.
Yes, retardedly evil indeed. And I mean, I think like related to that, right? The sense I got when I was listening to that sample, and the one before, this is the seriousness of intent here, which I think probably links to the Broder pretty well. Really, like there is a complete commitment to the idea of the music. You get the sense that these guys, this isn't a sound they're exploring. These guys actually walk around being this.
Yes.
You know, they probably have horrifying biomorphic tattoos they got in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And you know, that's pretty sick. There's like, there really is just this imperceptible difference between people who are doing a style either because they're being posers, or just because they're interested in it musically, or because, for any variety of reasons, some of them perfectly legitimate, right? There's, because they want to try out a new musical vocabulary, right? There's that, and then there's people who are like true believers.
Hey, it's Kari from Sepulchre Curse.
And I'm Jakob.
You're listening to Terminus.
Alright, and we are back from the cavernous death metal of Serpentrance with the cavernous death metal of Thaumaturgy. Charnel Gnosis, the long EP, out now independently on Bandcamp, and with a physical release coming on Adirondack Black Mass. Thaumaturgy, a good name for a band, no?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. As a longtime Vampire the Masquerade fan, I can thoroughly approve.
So this guy listens to Terminus, which is very cool. And like many Terminus listeners, he has he's a sort of a thoughtful and seriously composed independent project that he's working on, right? So this is he sort of referenced it. He described it as cavernous death metal, which was interesting. So when he said it to, so people, that term, we often say like, oh, do people use this term anymore, right? Like like. So he still uses that term, and it means he's sort of committed to some idea of this style that has been, or cavernous death doom, he said. Some idea of this style that's been around for a while. Like Serpentrance, or Serpentrance, or whatever, this is much more on the death metal side of the spectrum than some of this new wave of cavern stuff has been. Mm-hmm. You'll hear no orthodox here, nor even... no orthodox, nor even anything I would compare to like Witch Christ or something, right?
This is really at its heart just a death metal project.
Yeah, it's death metal with lots of slow parts.
Mm-hmm.
There are fast parts here, and the fast parts are very death metal, and probably closer to less primitive than the stuff on the Serpentrance.
There's a sophistication to this music, and I have ideas about possible influences, but you go ahead with your
think
impressions.
we've got some similar ideas, I think, about what sets this apart as a general concept, which is the tones are much less focused on, well, I guess a thing that sets apart all these new bands is that none of them are into reverb mongering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They've all got different ways of doing things, but none of them actually have the, quote, cavernous production with the sort of weird glistening, echoing trem leads or whatever that defined this stuff back in the day, that defined the incantation imitators. But a lot of them have, we just heard on Serpentrance, like a lot of them have very murky, high, low-end sounds, right? Or have sounds that are murky qua textural, right? Lots of interwoven, shrouded stuff, like the Lycaon, right? Where you've actually got a shit ton of riffy stuff going on, but it's hard to hear because it's all this sort of, it's all bleeding together in this way, right? This is kind of crisp. Not like black metal crisp, but it puts, instead of putting, I don't know how to describe it, sort of like, instead of putting guitar, it emphasizes guitar tone, but in the sense that, like, the tone, in the sense that we are really not just listening to, like, pedal sound or amp sound, but, like, tone. I don't know if that, does that make he highlights things, you get feedback, you get drawn out notes, it highlights harmonic qualities of chords and phrases. There's a clarity to it that is not commonly found in this style. And there are aspects of occasional melodic color in this that, while far from making this black death metal or anything like that, set it apart a bit. How would you explain it?
Well, I think that the color that you're talking about is a very important part of this project. In fact, I would say it's almost the primary distinguishing feature. Well, another thing is, like, compared to a lot of the other bands in this sort of pseudo-niche, whatever it may be nowadays, I have a feeling that this guy is listening to much more kind of technical or almost prog-touched music than a lot of guys in this style are. I didn't really write it in the notes, but I came to a conclusion that I think this guy is probably listening to a lot of the first wave of, like, demi-lich imitating bands or time ghoul imitating bands. Think of stuff like, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but did you ever listen to the old stuff by, Jesus. Who was it? Cosmic Atrophy?
No.
Yeah, so Cosmic Atrophy, that's...
I haven't heard Time Ghoul either.
Oh, okay. Well, so Cosmic Atrophy is a project by one of the guys, I believe one of the guys behind Dark Descent Records, which was one of the earliest takes on sort of demi-lich revival death metal. And this is... Thaumaturgy is not as technical as that, but a lot of the very colorful melodic ideas remind me of stuff like that, or Biolich, or just some other kind of like deep cut stuff from the 2000s. So I think he's incorporating the influence from very technical styles of music insofar as interesting kind of intervals and melodic ideas, and then he's stripping it back down to bring it in line with a sense of sort of not even necessarily primitivity, but clarity and sharpness that he wants. This is very interesting music. It's not fully formed yet, but I'm really intrigued by this guy's creative process. Because like you were saying, the melodic color of this is extremely different from most of the kind of like incantation worship bands out there. And I think that the more he seizes on that, the better this project will be.
He did send us an influences list. Now, that doesn't mean you're wrong about everything you've just said, because that could be tangential. That could be stuff that's filtering in, right, inflecting what he does. That quite possibly could be true. But the official influence list is very down the line in some ways, right? However, it does incantation, okay, Demoncy, Pro Fanatica, so that's confirming what you said about these now being much more important for the style than they used to be.
Yeah.
And then, like, stuff that I don't totally know. Fossilization, Crypts with a K, who are been around for a while. And then Hatopelagial and Thoribos, those guys we reviewed on the split. And Cosmocrator, who I am only vaguely familiar with, and is the best album by Spite Extremely.
It's ultra, but okay.
I listened to it. Yeah, I listened to that one 3 times in a row the other day. So in some sense, it's sort of like informed by very central stuff for this style. However, also some of the newer, artier versions of it, like Hatopelagial. Right?
Yeah, no, I think that I understand where he's coming from with a lot of his stated influences, but I feel like what's happening on this record is something that I've experienced, where you start a project with a certain idea in mind, and then it kind of gets away from you, and it becomes its own thing.
Yeah,
yeah. And then the best thing to do in that situation is to let it be what it is. Don't try to force it back in line. And I think this guy is approaching a very interesting idea, and I'm very excited to hear a follow-up release. There's a lot of great ideas here. I got some questions about structure and stuff, but overall, I think there is a very distinct, unique idea being approached here, and I want to see it expanded upon. I want to follow up with this guy.
All right, so that said, let us praise Hail the Conquering Worm. That's your first sample.
Yeah. Okay, so praise Hail the Conquering Worm. One thing, because we always forget to mention it up front, really like this guy's vocal style. He's doing this sort of like barbarian bellow thing, like almost something you would hear from like a Russian black metal band, but then it's like reverbed and delayed like fucking crazy. So it has that cavernous vibe, but the actual root tone of it is very different. So you're going to hear a few sections kind of develop throughout this. And something I like about this is that even though it is a one-man project, it has this strange kind of jammy quality. Like, you could consider this good or bad, but it feels like the guitar, in a lot of cases, is kind of like sketching out ideas or reaching for something, which ordinarily I think is a bad thing. But in this case, this music comes off to me as very abstract in a good way. Like, closer to actual kind of abstract progressive death metal from the 90s. I think it kind of lands. It doesn't have big heavy metal kicks in the way that we like a lot on the show, but I think it's very cool. So let's listen to about maybe a third of the way through Praise Hail, and we'll talk about what we hear. one thing that's apparent to me listening to this record is this is a guy who has actually kind of studied incantation riffs. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if this guy could play Mortal Throne of the Nazarene front to back, because he picks up on some of the subtleties of how incantation riffs are constructed that a lot of other guys don't. You know, certain stuff like to resolve the riff, you know, bouncing up or down an octave and then continuing the resolution in the different octave, which gives it that kind of disjointed, unnerving feeling. You know, the bands that are faking it are doing it within the same octave. This guy knows to extend the range and to create a different effect, which is also a very kind of like weirdo doom death thing to do. I bet this guy listens to a lot of like disembowelment or some of the more abstract early doom death stuff.
I only barely know disembowelment, but the sound quality here is more like disembowelment, isn't it?
Disembowelment has they were arriving
They had a
at it.
crisper tone, and in some ways they sounded kind of like a hardcore band.
Well, they also had the strange kind of flanged out watery quality, which here is just a result of a guy doing it at home. I'm not a huge fan of the production on this record, but these are limitations that we should expect, you know, from people just doing it on their own. That's fine. But obviously the centerpiece of this is that long, sprawling tremolo riff that just kind of saws over the drums, that da 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 da, you know. That's really cool, and that's closer to a real incantation riff than most people actually pull off. It's also, you know, ironically close to a Demoncy kind of riff. Demoncy's riff craft is sort of unparalleled. We should do a bonus episode where I talk about, you know, Joined in Darkness at one point or something. But I really like the... and this is one of the weird threads I was talking about at the top of the show. I see a lot of similarities between this and the Luminous Veil record in that it has this sprawl. And whether you like that sprawl or not, that's really going to determine your feelings about the record. Because, you know, I tend to be a guy that likes stuff that's very organized and punchy, but lately, you know, I've been digging back into stuff that kind of sprawls out and moves a little more erratically, and I think that prepped me for this record pretty well.
Okay, yeah. So, sprawl in this context, I mean, there's sprawl in black metal context that I'm obviously totally fine with, right? You know, big, expansive stuff. Well, actually, I mean, yeah, I guess there's, I probably am, I'm pretty invested in my own idea of tightness, although it might involve 3 riffs for 10 minutes, right? But, but like, the sprawl here is not so accessible to me.
Okay.
It's, you know, it's, I think that's not the fault of this project. That's just, you know, like, temperamentally I run towards faster stuff, right? And, and more than that, I am although he may be drawing wider influences from like arty death metal that I don't know, this is such a death metal cavernous death doom band that it's just so solidly in the genre that it's a little outside my wheelhouse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand what you're saying. I think for me, like,
it's like if I intrinsically liked these kinds of riffs better, right? Maybe absent some of the kinds of things that incantation does that make them inherently like exciting, right? And maybe the black metal-y tendency in incantation or whatever, right? If I inherently really liked certain things about the riffs or the atmospheres that maybe, you know, that like a real head in this style would, right? Then the sprawl would probably be something like, oh, I like these cadences. I like these textures. This is a little bit diffuse, but like I'm here for this, right?
Yeah,
and that
I get
seemed
that.
good to me because it's not quite my wheelhouse. I need it to be punchier. That's not his fault, right? That's not his fault. It's not a problem on my part either. It just is what it is. It's in some ways like this is a sophisticated and multifaceted thing, but it is definitely has squarely rooted itself in this place that I can't access in the way you can, right? This guy's working in your native language.
But at the same time, at the same time, he's working in my native language, but something that makes this interesting and kind of draws me to it is the inherent unpredictability of it. Like, which is why I think
be visible to me.
Yeah, no, it's like, it's not necessarily invisible to you. I think you can think of ways that some of these riffs could resolve that would make sense based off listening to, Onward to Golgotha or something. But one of the things that interests me about this project, even though it doesn't provide the same, heavy metal kicks that we're after a lot of the time, is the weirdness of it. There's this like malevolent questioning quality about this. You're never sure exactly where it's going to go, and I think that's really cool.
That's a great phrase. I like that. Use that in the write-up. Malevolent questioning. So basically, what can I contribute in this context? Well, I like the fast parts. So this is from Aeon of Decay. Here's a cool fast part. So that part is really cool. And that's the thing he does. I mean, this is a gesture that I know comes from this school of bands to some degree, right? But when these sort of like squalling lead lines just arc up from the main power chording of the riff, right? He starts with that. He lays down this bass of just basic, just impulsive power chord Black Death riffing, right? Dum 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 dum, right? Which is basically just a very standard riff, except it's got one variant on the timing where you can tell he's really excited to play the nastiest interval, and he just holds it, which is great. Like, he holds it a little longer than anyone else would, and he drops it, and it makes it sound heavy and gives it more momentum. So, like, he does a stock riff, sawing stock riff very well, right? And it lays down this sort of bass around the root note, and then he starts just adding other stuff in. Then you get the and it's sort of like you have this bass continuum of thrashing stuff, and then it sort of the lead arcs up out and then goes back in. It kind of it's like a serpent, like sort of like I don't know. You're like watching like snaky serpents in lava or something. Sort of like jumping up out of the lava and going back in, and that kind of highly well, I like that guitar with that sort of fried kind of sound and energy kind of sound, and that kind of unhinged attack in it. That stuff's cool. Generally, the fast parts are more in keeping with what you said about this being in touch with other realms of death metal. Generally, the fast parts are like more proficient sounding and less primitive than I would expect.
Yeah, no, I
that's
think
closer to the nastiness of that, the intervals in that, and the particular kind of liquid flowing sound is definitely coming out of this sort of profanatic kind of incantation school. I feel that, but the general way it's being played has way more in common with like regular death metal or even like Behemoth.
No, I get that, but it's smoothed over. But
and
not
it's fast in a way. A lot of this stuff is the way this guy is fast is different from the way a lot of people who play in this style try to do fast.
Yeah, because fast in this style is usually just how hard and fast can I down pick a power chord. This guy is more delicate on the guitar, which is something you'll also hear in like late Profanatica. He
can also do higher BPM, I think, is the thing.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I think that as insofar as like the influences he listed, he's probably listening to a lot of the later Profanatica stuff that I also listen to and really love, where it's a little bit more crisp and liquid than the early, really like just kind of like chunky, nasty stuff. But the DNA in common is the sort of interval choice. And there's certain guitar techniques he's using that are directly from the Profanatica school, the idea of, like you were saying at the beginning, these kind of churning power chord tremolo riffs, and then these arcing leads, which are based off of these... it's also an incantation technique, sort of like slowed down, stretched out, tremoloed, like arpeggio arrangements, just with like really fucking nasty interval choices that snap back to the chord at the end, which is a technique that is great and should be used more. It's one of the more sophisticated parts of that style. No, I think it's really cool. I like the like you said, I like the whole liquid quality of this music, as well as just the sort of abstract, weird, never concluding the right way sort of system, which reminds me of like early højes stuff. So this guy's clearly extremely well versed in this whole lineage of extreme metal. A lot of guys are into one or two things. This guy's listening to all of them and incorporating them all at once. So let's go to Seated Upon the Peaks of Extinction, the final track that both of us are sampling. So we're going to hear a couple interesting things. One, we're going to hear this sort of tritone riff that is inherent to this style. Like, if you're in a band like this and you're not doing this riff, you're fucking up somewhere in the process.
What's that meme? If your friends aren't like following,
your network is your net worth. But about Profanatica and Demoncy and shit. But then, so he's using this conventional sort of Profanatica or højes like tritone structure or Demoncy. But then in the back end of the riff that he starts folding into it, it goes in a more harmonically interesting direction. And I think this is something this guy should expand on, because this is one of the most exciting parts of the record to me.
So which tritone riff were you talking about? Is it that dum 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 dum?
Yeah,
dum,
that one.
Dum.
And then he starts intersecting it. Well, it kind of
So
starts
it's
as
like
a
root to a fifth, but there's an octave in it's like root to fifth, but the fifth is an octave up or something.
yeah, and then down to like a seventh or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a very like standard arrangement for this style. Like that's a vocabulary riff that anyone can use.
Okay,
But
wait,
then-
no, it's just like root, fifth, half step over the root.
Yeah, you know that shit better than I do.
I don't know. It's like it's the big power chordy one, and then it's the nasty one, and then it's the slinky little one.
Exactly. There you go. But then he starts playing around with this second riff, you know, and at first he's alternating and then he's kind of intersecting the two.
Mm-hmm.
He just keeps like rearranging these two kind of motifs in different ways, which is interesting. The idea of like he's almost experimenting in real time with different arrangements of these two riffs. And there's something about it that I really like. I can't really put my finger on it. I think that something I like so much about this record is the kind of like jammy quality of it, which is sort of impossible because this is a one-man project, but you get this almost improvisational feel, even though it's too organized and it's too cleanly played to be improvisational. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I really like the way those two riffs ricochet off each other, right? The second one is... that second turn definitely takes the stock riff and makes a powerful phrase out of the whole thing.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. And also I'm wondering, this is kind of a shot in the dark, but I'm guessing this guy probably listens to Ruins of Everast a lot.
That makes sense, just because of the particular sounds he's interested in and the scale of it and the way, I don't know, like, that was a particularly weird... He stacked two dissonant riffs on each other, but in a way that made something a little bit, that doesn't just sound bludgeoning, right?
Yeah, no, it's like you bring that up. That's another thing that makes this record interesting is that most of this stuff is dissonant, but as an aggregate, it has a kind of consonant quality to it. It never feels like you're listening to random chromatic stuff. You know, it feels like all of this meshes together surprisingly well. You can create this sort of like mutant melody, you know, as a through line through these tracks. That's I don't know, that's really interesting to me. I'm really excited to hear more material by this guy.
Yeah, this is, you know, with the Ruins of Everest, it really is just, I guess it's like a cool thing. It's like that project has come to fruition in the sense that now a bunch of new bands are responding to what he was doing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it's a significant gauntlet he's laid down, and how you even begin to be influenced by a band like that is funny, right? But like, I guess it, and for some people it has to do with scale and ambition. For some people it has to do, we've been finding bands where the riffing style really seems to come from there, and now we're also getting, because he's so wide ranging, there are these kinds of Ruins of Everest ideas creeping in all sorts of places.
Yeah,
He influences other people trying to do sort of monumental, sort of Gesamtkunstwerk kind of shit, right? But he also is influencing genre work in a way that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's... I mean, that's one of the things that makes Ruins of Everest... Yeah, I'll go out there and say probably one of the best metal bands of all time.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Who's going to fight us on that? You know?
Yeah, we dare you. Yeah, so yeah, we'll defend the honorable name of Alexander von Meilenwald. So next is my sample from later in this track. Here's another
10
cool
seconds
part.
later.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Okay, well, should we just give him the 10 seconds? Or should we leave that a mystery?
We'll leave it a mystery. Let's just go from here.
So much can happen in 10 seconds.
That's true. You like the part that sounds like a song.
Yes. Well,
Fucking loser.
But you were saying the whole thing sounds kind of song, not song-like, but like, yeah, that part does sound like a song. But like it right there is a very concentrated example of what you were saying about the melodies.
Yeah, there's a lot more tonal color.
Every single one of those is a buzzsaw chromatic riff, but somehow they're being, I don't know, he probably knows more about music theory than us. There might be I've heard of chords. These things that sort of relate. I think they're a way of relating different riffs to each other, and I hear you can change them. There may have been some of that going on. And you know, there's some sort of like organized melodic sequences are appearing relationally between the different buzzsaw riffs. Individually, some of those had that primordial extreme metal quality we've been hyping all the time.
Yeah.
You know, take your pick of any album from before '93, right? But what was cool about that was just how many of them there were so fast. So, like, for me, because I can't just sink myself into the particular tonal and atmospheric qualities of this in the way you can, the moments of intense concentration, like the slower parts will scan as diffuse, and the moments of intense concentration will scan as the exciting ones. But it's interesting that he whips that out. It signals moments like that confirm your hypothesis, right? That there's a very sure hand musically under a lot of this, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, suddenly we were in the sprawl, but he was completely in control of that, as in control of it as he wanted to be, and now it's just cool event.
Yeah.
But my favorite part is like the lock-in with the rolling double bass, so this is definitely drum machine, right?
Yeah, this is a drum machine.
Yeah. So like. There's a place where you can hear his picking. He's doing really aggressive picking, and his like actual death metal guitarist technique is really coming through there in a powerful way, I think. Like he's it's making a virtue of he's like playing against the drum machine in a way that makes it a virtue of the drum machine. It's like, look at me, I'm locked in with the drum machine in a way that sounds organic and groovy.
Yeah. No, I can see that.
But yeah, I think that's a very powerful storming passage. I mean, of course, I would love to hear, why not make a version of this where I get that the slow parts are the center. Why not make all the fast parts that intense?